Hello class, this is Demetrius Wilson with Human Resource Management. We are now on chapter 11, moving right along. There are only 14 chapters, I believe, so 3 more chapters after this. And now we're going to talk about employee assessment, which is really important because you need to assess employees in terms of their performance, and then you need to let them know what they're doing well, what they're not doing well on, tell them how you think they should improve, and get some feedback from them. So our learning objectives are to define the reasons for a formal performance evaluation system, explain the process to develop a performance review system. So when you define the reasons for a formal process, so that things are written, so that you can refer back to the actual document, things that you just need to have in place in an organization. Explain the process to develop the performance review system. You have to sit down with so HR, depending upon what department you're in, HR, and then all the different departments, maybe sales, operations, human resources, accounting, things like that. Sit down with them and come up with a game plan on what do you need from the performance review, and then kind of work backwards and construct it from there. So here we're looking the performance evaluation system. So, performance evaluation system is a systematic way to examine how well an employee is performing on his or her job. So if you notice, the word systematic implies the performance evaluation process should be a planned system that allows feedback to be given in a formal as opposed to a formal informal sense, right? So it needs to be formal, meaning written, not just I'm going to talk to you in the hallway, I'm going to call you into office and talk to you about it, but nothing's written. It's nothing that I can refer back to. The purpose of the process, first, the evaluation process should encourage positive performance and behavior, right? So we want to talk about the good things that you do, and we want to talk about your great behavior. Second is a way to satisfy employee curiosity as to how well they are performing their job, because people want to know, am I performing my job well or am I not? And then they want to take action in terms of that. So if you're performing your job well, you want to continue to do so. If you're not, then you want to figure out what you can do differently. It can also be used as a tool to develop employees. Lastly, it can provide a basis for pay raises. So typically my company and most other companies, that's when they provide their pay raises, is during the evaluation period. Promotions and legal and disciplinary actions, right? So I've written people up before, and then I've also talked about the things that they were doing wrong in their performance review. So it's, you see that consistent pattern, right? It went from a verbal warning to a written warning to writing about it in their performance review, and then eventually terminating that individual. So let's talk about the steps in designing the actual system. So determining how often performance evaluations will be given. If pay increase should be tied to performance evaluations, I believe it definitely should. And setting goals. In other words, what would the organization hopes to achieve from the process in these steps, right? And setting goals. So after you do the evaluation for your 2015, then you need to think about setting the goals for 2016. I know they should not always be the same goals. The goals should definitely differ from year to year because things change from year to year. We all live and work in a dynamic business environment. Once these 3 items have been determined, formalization of the process, including determine who will evaluate the employees, right? Who's going to do the evaluation, and creation of the forms that will be used for each specific job within the organization, right? You have to know who's supposed to be doing what. So performance evaluation system errors are, there's errors with everything, and these are a few different ways that errors can occur. So a halo effect. The halo effect can occur when the source of the rater feels one aspect of the performance is high and therefore rates all the other areas high, right? So I feel like you do good at your customer service, so I rate everything else high. But in reality, everything else is not, top notch. Just your customer service is top notch. Validity issues are the extent to which the tool measures the relevant aspect of performance. The aspects of performance should be based on the key skills and responsibilities of the actual job. And these should be reviewed often to make sure they are still applicable to the job analysis and job description, right? So sometimes jobs, they change, right? And if a job changes, then you have to change how you evaluate someone. You can't evaluate them on something that's no longer relative to the job. I'll talk about reliability. It refers to how consistent the same measuring tool works throughout the organization, right? I can't measure you and you have a certain position, differently than I measure Carl and he has that same position. Acceptability refers to how well the members of the organization, manager, and employees accept the performance evaluation tool as a valid measure of performance. Right? Is this valid? Do we accept it? Do we agree with it? And if we don't, talk to your direct manager. And specificity, which tells employees job expectations and how they can be met. So I want to tell you specifically what you can do to meet what I need for you to do, right? But until I tell you that or show you that on paper, you really truly do not know. So you must make sure that you understand and know that. Okay, so let's talk about the Civil Service Reform Act. So the Civil Service Reform Act was put into place in 1978. This came about as a result of some legal cases and put new requirements in place for the performance evaluations for public employees. These resulted in private companies paying more attention to the legality of their own performance appraisal systems. The components of the act include all agencies were required to create performance review systems, right? Appraisal systems would encourage employee participation, establishing the performance standards they will be rated against, right? So they want to have some skin or some stake in the game. The critical elements of the job must be in writing, right? It can't just be I'm telling you these are what your responsibilities are. They have to be in writing. Employees must be advised of the critical elements when hired, right? So you have to know and understand what your responsibilities are. If I don't tell you what your responsibilities are, how can I hold you accountable for them? Uh, The system must be based exclusively on the actual performance and critical elements of the job. They cannot be based on a curve, for example, like you may grade some tests on a curve, but you can't do that on a curve. And they must be conducted and recorded at least once per year, right? So it needs to occur at least one time per year. So then they talk about discrimination and performance appraisal. So they said 35 of 66 cases were won, all had similar aspects. So Holly and Field study found that defendants won more cases on performance appraisals if, right, so these are the ones that they won, appraisers were given written instructions on how to complete the appraisal for employees. If you give that to, your managers, then they're going to be okay. Job analysis was used to develop the performance measures of the evaluation. The focus of the appraisal was actual behaviors instead of personality traits, and the upper management reviewed the ratings before the performance appraisal interview was concluded. Right, so sometimes you need to reach out to somebody else, whether it be the legal counsel, the vice presidents, or the presidents. Okay, so now we have our sources of information, right? So how are you going to be evaluated? You could be evaluated by your manager, of course, that's most natural. You could be evaluated by yourself. So what a lot of companies do is say, hey, write your self-evaluation and send it to me. Some write their own notes, and others just say, hey, I agree with what you said. I had an individual before, and she was supposed to do my review, and she just said, go write it yourself and send it to me. If I disagree with anything, I will let you know. Uh, Peers, you could be evaluated by your peers. That's not the best thing to me a lot of the time, just because people have certain biases and don't like people, they hold on to that, and that gets inflicted in their review. Customer and client, right? So you get survey scores and things of that nature back, which my company does as well. And you're going to have valuation in terms of that. And then a subordinate, it could be from somebody that reports to you that says, hey, my manager goes to the people who report to me and ask about me and bring some feedback. And that's I've been through that before. Sometimes just people with a different perspective can listen, learn some new ideas, talk about what's wrong, and then approach that manager with what's wrong so that they can fix it. Another learning objective, be able to describe the various appraisal methods, right? So are there a lot of appraisal methods? Of course there are, but we will go through all of them in detail. So every appraisal is industry specific and should be job specific, right? I don't want to use the same one for customer service and for claims. It should be job specific. I know it takes a little extra time, but it's something that you definitely need to do. When determining what method should be used, we have four basic options. The first is the trait method, right? You see at the very top, which managers look at employee-specific traits in relation to the job, such as friendliness to the customer. The behavioral method looks at the individual actions within the specific job. Comparative method compares one employee with other employees. And results method are focused on employee accomplishments, such as whether or not they met a quota, right? So that's typically what you're going to see. in a results, which is called results-based business. Two components to evaluations. You have your criteria and you have your rating. So criteria, the aspects the employee is actually being evaluated on. This is our criteria. This is what you're being evaluated on, which should be tied directly to their job description. Then rating is the type of scale that would be used to rate each criteria in the performance evaluation. For example, 1 through 5 may be essay ratings or yes or no ratings. Tied to the rating and criteria is the weighting of each item you'll be given, right? So customer service, this is a very customer service oriented company, we're going to say that that's going to be worth like weighted as 50%, and the other two will be weighted as 25%. Or more realistic, it'll be about 25%, and then you'll have a variety of options that make up the consistency of the 75%. Type of criteria and ratings, right? So you have a lot of types of criteria and ratings. So you have the graphic rating scale. Behavioral method is perhaps the most popular choice for performance evaluations. Type of evaluation lists traits required for the job and asks the source to rate the individual on each attribute, right? So you're being rated on these different things. Easy appraisal. The source answers a series of questions about the employee performance in essay form, right? So that's when you do a essay format. Checklist scale is a series of questions is asked, and the manager simply responds yes or no to the questions, which can fall either into the behavioral or trait method, or both. Another variation of the scale is to check mark in the criteria the employee meets, right? So you just have something. Did they meet it all? Yes, they did. Then we go ahead and move forward. Types of criteria and ratings. So you have your work standards approach, ranking methods, MBOs or managing by objectives, and behaviorally anchored rating scale. So work standards approach could be the more effective way of evaluating employees, best used when employee productivity is most important. Ranking method system, also called a stack rank. So now I take my 10 employees and I rank them. I say this is number 1 and this is number 10. And a lot of times it's very, very tough for managers to do. Management by objectives, sure I have a video or something on that, is a concept developed by Peter Drucker in his 1954 book, a long time ago, but still applicable. The practice of management, this method is results oriented and similar to the work standards approach with a few differences. So management by objectives, right? Your goals should be SMART goals, and SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, and results oriented and time limited, right? So that's the acronym, and you go back and check that out for your SMART goals. Your SMART goals need to fall under all of these different categories. The BARS method, right? So the BARS method first determines the main performance dimensions of the job, for example, in a personal relationship. Then the tool utilizes narrative information such as from a critical incidents file and assigns quantified ranks to each expected behavior. In the system, there's a specific narrative outlining what exemplifies good and poor behavior for each category. All right, so then you also have two types of criteria and rankings, or ratings, I'm sorry. Ranking method, also stack ranking, so we already went over that one. I'm sorry, I meant to go to the next slide. All right, so a couple more learning objectives. Be able to discuss best practices, performance review planning, right? So what are your best practices that should be shared all throughout the organization? And be able to write an improvement plan for an employee. So it's not all like they talk about HR and hugs and mugs. So sometimes you have to go through the review and say, hey, this is what you need to improve upon, and this is what you need to fix, right? So this colorful. Okay, had a little bit of technical difficulties on the microphone there, but completing and conducting the appraisal. So make sure the evaluation has a direct relation to the job, right? It shouldn't be a bunch of personal and opinion things in there, right? It has to be directly correlated or related to the job. Use more than one evaluation method, right? You can use a lot of those. So I get in my evaluations, I have the employee feedback, and then then I have my feedback. So there are a lot of things that you can use, depending upon what your company comes up with. The ones that I've, in the company that I work for, have been pretty good. Train managers on the system. So if you're in HR, you need to train the managers. You need to let them know what they need to do and how to use it most effectively, and troubleshoot any problems or technical difficulties they may have. You want to involve managers because maybe managers have good input in terms of what the employees or associates are saying. Feedback should be continuous, right? Feedback is like communication. It should be ongoing. Develop standards for each job to avoid bias, right? So you don't want to be biased in terms of what people are doing and or how people are feeling in terms of their evaluation. So as long as you continue to play fair, then things will turn out great. Consider employee self-evaluations, right? So don't just skip over their self-evaluation. Just say, you know what, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to put down what I think, and then we're going to go from there, right? You need to consider what they're saying as well. Employee goals should tie into organization's strategic plan. Review the evaluations often as jobs and expectations change. And yes, jobs and expectations definitely do change. Like I said, we live in and work in a dynamic business environment, so they change very, very quickly. So you also want to make sure that you train managers and you train employees, set the ground rules and the different steps in the process. Managers and employees will need to be trained on a new system or adjustment of an older system. Some ground rules for managers might include some of the following. Use only factual information and avoid opinion or perception. That's key, right? Keep it strict, stick to the facts. For each section, comments should be at least 2 sentences in length, and examples of employee behavior should be provided. 3 reviews must be complete and shared with the employee before the deadline, right? You need to share it with that individual. You can't keep it hidden, but I've seen people do that before. Make messages clear and direct, right? So I want to be clear and concise in regards to my communication, and focus on observable behaviors, right? Things that I can observe. I observed you coming in late. I observed you not completing this form correctly. Examples of steps to a process you will want to communicate to your managers. Review the employee's last performance evaluation. Note goals from the previous evaluation period, right? So now I know what your goals were from the previous evaluation period, and I can look at those goals and determine if you met them. But most systems now, they actually have the prior year's goals, and they show it in there, and they show your progress. You want to review the employee's file and speak with other managers who interface with this person. In other words, gather data about their performance. You want to fill out the necessary forms for this employee's appraisal. Note which areas you want to address in the appraisal interview with the employee. 4, if your organization bases pay increases with the performance evaluation, know the pay increase you are able to offer the employee. So know how much you can. Let's say they come back and say, I would like a little bit more. Write any improvement plans as necessary, right? So if I have an improvement plan for you, it's time for you to listen up, take notes, and do the things that I tell you to do in the meeting. And number 6, schedule a time and date with the employee, right? So you want to make sure that you're scheduling that appropriately. Give people time, ample time to talk. Don't rush them through it. That's never ever a good thing. So improvement plans, they shouldn't be punitive. Meant to punish. Help employees succeed, and they have 6 components in an improvement plan. So sometime improvement plan may be necessary. Here are the aspects to a good improvement plan for the employee. So number 1, you want to define the problem. You want to discuss. Number 2, you want to discuss the behaviors that should be modified based on the problem, right? So you're coming in late. The behavior that's going to change and be modified is that you need to come to work on time. List specific strategies to modify the behavior, right? So how are we going to modify the behavior? How are you going to modify your behavior? Develop long and short-term goals, right? So we want to talk about goals within the year, and we'll talk about goals within 5 years. Define a reasonable timeline for improvements, right? How quickly are you going to get this done, get this accomplished? You definitely remember all SMART goals. Remember that they have to be measured by time. If it's not measured by time, measurable in that facet, then it's not a SMART goal. And then schedule quote unquote check-in dates to discuss the improvement plan, right? And then, so for the employee, it might not be the most fun thing, but you know what, you put yourself in that situation, you know, you are going to have to check in, and we're going to see where you stand and how much you have or have not improved. So you want to organize the process, and then we'll talk about the interview types. So tell and sell, tell and listen, and problem solving. So to effectively manage the process, these steps should be followed. So these will give you guys 6 steps that you should actually follow that are really good. Provide each manager with the job description for each employee, right? So you have to know and understand that. Number 2, provide each manager with necessary documents such as criteria and rating sheets, right? So I want to have all my ducks in a row before I meet with you. Give the manager instructions and ground rules for filling out the documents. Number 4, work with the manager on pay increases for each employee. If your organization has decided to tie performance evaluations with pay increases, right, which, you know, like I said, my company does and a lot of companies have. Provide coaching assistance on objectives, development, and improvement plans if necessary, right? So sometimes, you know, you need to provide, you know, feedback to an individual, but other times you need to get some, you know, some guidance from somebody else who may be a mentor, somebody higher up. So work with the manager on pay increases for each employee. If your organization decided they'll go ahead and go with the pay increases. Provide the coaching, and then give timelines to the manager for each performance review that he or she is responsible for. So that's like a big deal. You know, people, you know, they want their promotion, they want their raises. So you as a manager have to be on top of that to get in front of them and tell them, you know, how good they're doing, you know, or possibly how bad they're doing, but hopefully how good they're doing, and this is what your raise will be. So to provide the best feedback to the employee, you know, you want to consider using different types of interview process. Well, before the feedback, let's talk about the interview process. So you have a tell and sell interview. In this type of interview, the manager does most of the talking and passes his or her view to the employee, right? So you know, they're not doing a lot of talking; they're doing a lot of listening. Tell and listen is a type of interview the manager communicates feedback and then addresses the employee's thoughts about the interview. And a problem-solving interview, the employee and the manager discuss the things that are going well and those that aren't going well, and which can make for a more productive discussion. So you saw the difference between those. So tell and sell, I'm just talking at you. Tell and listen, I talk at you, you talk at me. Problem solving, we're working together to figure out and get it right. So to provide the best feedback to the employee, consider the following: be direct and specific, right? You know, your communication must be clear and concise. Do not be personal. Always compare the performance to the standard, right? Don't talk about, you know, you look like my ex, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, or whatever. You know, you don't make anything personal. Remember, it's a development opportunity. It's an opportunity to develop this individual and maybe cultivate them into a great employee. And thank the employee and avoid criticism, right? You want to thank them, shake their hand, look them straight in the eye, and you want to also avoid you know, the criticism, because you know, if you've written the review correctly and they're not doing what they're supposed to do, you already see the criticism of their performance there in the review. So last but not least slide, these are the possible outcomes, right? Possible outcomes of the interview, and you know, they call the interview or their evaluation or whatever, but the employee now has written documented feedback on his or her performance. The organization has documented information on low performance in case the employee needs to be dismissed. The organization has documented information on low performance in case they need to be dismissed. The employee has performed well and is eligible for a raise, which is the happy time, yay, hooray. The employee has performed well and could be promoted. Okay, yay and hey again. So it's not just negative things, there are positive things in here as well. Performance is not up to expectations, so improvement plan should be put into place, right? So maybe that's not yay, but at least you still have a job, and they're willing to put you on an improvement plan and get you where you need to be. And the employee hasn't done well. Improvement plans have not worked. The employee has been warned before, and the employee should be dismissed. Sometimes it's just too much, and it says, you know what, it's time to go. So that's it for the chapter, for chapter 11. Like I said, we only have 3 more chapters, right? And you're going to be home free. So if you have any questions during the week, feel free to email me. Always double check my emails to make sure that I see your correspondence. So that's it. Make sure that you take your quiz for the week, any other additional homework assignments as well, and you'll be good to go. So as always, I want you all to have a good day and a great week.